The rain had been falling for hours. Not the kind of gentle drizzle that soothes you to sleep, but a cold, merciless downpour that turned the highway into a mirror and every headlight into a ghost. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the narrow strip of road ahead. The wipers groaned with every sweep, barely keeping up with the torrents of water. It was close to midnight. His GPS had lost signal long ago, and he wasn't even sure which state he was in anymore. Somewhere between Pennsylvania and New York, lost among forests, rain, and darkness. He hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes. Only trees, the hiss of rain, and the darkness that swallowed everything beyond the reach of his headlights. Then, through the veil of rain off to the right, a flicker of yellow light, signs swinging in the wind. He slowed down and squinted. The old sign still glowed faintly, its words barely legible. The Ember Lodge, vacancy. He almost smiled. The place looked like it had been pulled straight out of a 1950s postcard, an old roadside lodge with 6 rooms, peeling paint, silence, and damp air. Not exactly what he'd been looking for, but exhaustion won. He turned onto the gravel drive, the wet stones crunching softly under his tires. The lodge stood motionless, like a frozen backdrop from an old movie. Above the entrance, the neon sign blinked faintly, as if it were breathing. The windows were dark. Only the reception area glowed dimly inside. Daniel turned off the engine, stepped out, and stood still for a moment, listening. No sound, only the steady drip of rain sliding off the roof. Then he gathered himself and pushed the door open. The bell above the door chimed. Inside, the air was warm but unmoving. The smell of dust, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like a perfume no one wore anymore. Behind the counter stood a young woman in an old-fashioned clerk's uniform. Perfectly neat hair, impeccable posture, a polite smile, like a portrait from another time brought to life. "Good evening," she said softly. "You're lucky. We have 1 room left, room 9. Her voice echoed slightly as if the walls repeated her words. Daniel nodded, handed over cash. The card terminal wasn't working, she explained. The key was heavy, brass, with a red tag, etched on it in neat letters. 9. He signed the guest book, a real paper ledger with worn pages and dozens of inked names. His own signature looked strangely out of place there, like graffiti on an old gravestone. The hallway stretched narrow and dim, lit by yellow bulbs. The wallpaper, patterned with faded flowers, peeled near the ceiling. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and from one of the rooms came a faint tune. Soft jazz, old and melancholic. But when he stopped to listen, it cut off abruptly. Room 9 was at the very end. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, simple. A bed, a wooden nightstand, a small TV, and a sink with a modest mirror above it. He set down his backpack and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress creaked as if sighing. The air smelled faintly of lavender mixed with dust. He pressed the power button on the TV. The screen lit up with static. He flipped through a few channels. Nothing. Only one worked. A man in a suit, an old studio. The colors yellowed and aged. Across the bottom of the screen scrolled a headline. Local tragedy. Fire destroys the Ember Lodge. 6 dead. Daniel froze. He blinked and the screen filled with static again. Probably just some old news footage, he thought. A vintage broadcast, maybe replayed by a local channel. He turned the TV off. The rain outside had slowed. In the darkness, only the neon sign flickered red and yellow, its reflection shimmering in puddles. When he turned back toward the mirror for a moment, he thought he saw movement behind him, a shadow passing across the room. He spun around. Nothing. He laughed nervously and sat back down. Just tired, he whispered to himself. He checked his phone. No signal. The time read 12:07 a.m. He plugged it into the charger, turned off the lights, and pulled the blanket over himself. The darkness felt too thick. Then, footsteps, slow, quiet, in the hallway. He held his breath. The steps came closer. They stopped right outside his door. The floorboards creaked. Silence. A few seconds later, 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" he whispered. No reply. 3 knocks again. Lighter this time, almost hesitant. He stood, walked to the door, peered through the peephole. Nothing. He tried the handle. The door wouldn't budge. Locked, from the inside. He stepped back. The air changed. First faintly, then stronger. A smell. Smoke. He turned toward the window. The neon sign flickered faster, red light pulsing across the walls. And then, beneath his feet, came a low hum. Steady, electric, like power running through the floor. For an instant, the room looked different. The wallpaper was darkened, the floor covered in ash, the mirror cracked down the middle. He blinked, and everything snapped back. Normal room. He sat back on the bed, his hands trembling. Fatigue, stress, maybe a hallucination. But the smell of smoke didn't fade. It thickened, acrid and real. He looked again at the window. Orange light danced faintly in the glass. He rushed to the door, yanked it open. The hallway was empty. No smoke, no fire, just silence. From far down the hall, that same soft jazz tune began playing again. He turned back toward the room. The TV was on. On the screen, flames. The building burning. Amid the crackling, he heard a woman's voice screaming. And in the reflection on the glass, he saw himself, standing at the very same window, watching. The screen went dark. The hum faded. The smoke vanished. Outside, the rain returned, steady, monotonous, as if nothing had happened. Daniel sat on the bed and closed his eyes. He didn't know when he finally drifted off. The last thing he heard before sleep took him was the faint sound of the reception bell, a single chime, as though someone had just entered an empty lodge. The morning came far too quietly. No usual sounds of waking life, no birds, no cars, no distant hum of movement, only a soft pale light slipping through the curtains. Half asleep, Daniel thought the rain must still be falling, but when he opened his eyes, he knew immediately. Something was wrong. His phone lay beside the bed, screen black. He pressed the button. Nothing. It hadn't charged. The clock read 6:47, but the second hand wasn't moving. He sat up and rubbed his face. His head ached, heavy and dull, like after a deep, dreamless sleep. The air in the room felt still, lifeless. The silence was so thick it made his own breathing sound foreign. He got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The lights were out. Only dim daylight, cold and gray, spilled weakly through the window at the far end. He walked past the other rooms, glancing at the cracks between doors. No movement, no sound. At the reception desk, no one. The bell sat in its place. The row of keys hung on hooks, but instead of 6, there were only 5. His key was missing. He pressed the bell. The clear metallic sound echoed through the building, but no one answered. So he stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap. The rain had stopped. The neon sign was dead, its wires hanging limp and silent. The parking lot was empty. His car sat alone, but coated in a thin layer of dust, as if it had been there not overnight, but for years. He turned toward the building. The paint, faintly visible in the night, was now cracked and peeling. The windows, shattered, hollow, dark. The door to the upper floor dangled from one hinge. "This can't be real," he whispered. He circled the lodge. The ground beneath him was dry, cracked, lifeless. Behind the building, blackened beams, scorched stone and ash. Burn marks still scarred the walls. Everything was dead. Daniel stood for a long moment before hearing the rumble of an engine. An old pickup truck approached along the road. He ran toward it, waving. The driver, an elderly man with weathered hands and deep lines across his face, stopped and rolled down the window. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he asked. "I stayed the night at the lodge," Daniel said. "But now, it looks abandoned, completely destroyed." The old man frowned. "Lodge? Son, that place has been gone for 40 years, burned down back in '83. A chill ran through Daniel's spine. "No, I stayed there, last night. The woman at reception, young, neat, with a name tag. Everything worked." The old man shook his head slowly. "Then maybe you were dreaming. Though." He paused, looking toward the ruins. "You wouldn't be the first one to say that." He sighed and told him the story. The Ember Lodge used to be a popular stop for drivers, salesmen, travelers passing through. In August 1983, it burned down in the middle of the night. The official cause? Faulty wiring. 6 people died. Among them, the clerk, a young woman named Alice May. "They found her body by the reception desk," the man said quietly. "They say she was waiting for guests when the fire reached the doors, but some folks claim they still heard the bell ring, even while the building was burning." He wiped his forehead, glancing back toward the hill. "People say you can still see lights out there sometimes. I did once, like about 10 years ago. Drove by late, saw the sign glowing. Vacancy. But when I stopped, there was nothing. Just ash." Daniel didn't speak. His thoughts raced, his pulse hammered. The memories came flooding back. The bell, the TV, the smell of smoke, the moving shadows. He pulled out his phone, tried to take a photo, but the camera wouldn't open. The screen stayed black. When he looked up, the old man was already rolling the window up. "Forget that place," he said. "That stretch of road plays tricks on people." Then he drove away. Daniel stood alone among the ruins. For a while he stared, until something caught his eye. A small piece of metal near the doorway, darkened by fire but still recognizable. He bent down and picked it up. A room tag. The engraving still faintly visible. Room 9. He ran his finger along the number. The metal was cold, but as he held it, a faint sound rose in the air. A bell. One soft crystalline chime, the same tone he'd heard last night. He spun around. No one. The wind stirred the dry grass. A crow croaked somewhere in the distance. And yet, for a fleeting second, he felt someone standing behind him. He turned slowly. Empty. Just the sky and the broken remains of the lodge. That day, Daniel decided to drive back to town. But as he followed the road, the GPS again showed no signal, and the radio caught only static. He stopped at a small gas station to ask for directions. The clerk, an older man in a wide-brimmed hat, gave him a puzzled look. "The Ember Lodge? Son, that place burned down ages ago. You mean that old story? Where'd you get that tag?" Daniel looked down. The metal plate sat in his jacket pocket. He didn't remember putting it there. The clerk leaned in, voice low. "They say people who touch things from that place start having dreams." "What kind of dreams?" "About fire. About faces in the windows. About room 9. Daniel's mouth went dry. He paid for his coffee, got in the car and drove off, trying not to glance at the rearview mirror. But curiosity won. He looked, just for a second. On the back seat sat someone else. A shape, faint in the sunlight but clear enough to see. Not a reflection. A woman. Her hair pinned in an old-fashioned bun. And on her chest, a small name tag. Alice May. He blinked. She was gone. His hands trembled on the wheel. He didn't look back again. But the scent lingered, faint, sweet, unmistakable. The same old perfume that had greeted him in the lobby of the Ember Lodge. And somewhere deep inside his mind, beneath the sound of the road, he heard it again. The bell. A single chime, the same one that rang the first night he stepped through the doors of the Ember Lodge. A few days passed. Daniel was back home, but peace never followed. Everything that had happened felt like a dream, yet the metal tag engraved with Room 9 still lay on his desk, cold and undeniably real. He couldn't throw it away. Every time he tried, something inside him froze. And every night, the dreams returned. Endless corridors, a flickering neon sign, the bell and the fire swallowing everything around him. One morning he woke to the faint smell of smoke. He turned on the light. Nothing was burning, but the scent lingered in the air, sharp, familiar. That was when he decided he needed to know the truth. Daniel worked as a freelance journalist, writing investigations for small online publications, sometimes crime, sometimes strange folklore or forgotten events. But never before had he investigated something that had happened to him. That same day, he got in his car and drove back to the nearest town beside the ruins. Libraries, archives, yellowed newspapers. He searched for any mention of the Ember Lodge. The earliest record was dated 1961. New lodge opens on Highway 41. A photograph accompanied it. Smiling owners, a young couple, freshly painted walls, potted palms by the entrance. Next article, 1978. Small fire in Room 9, no injuries. Daniel froze. Room 9. Even back then. Then came the headline that made his hands tremble. August 1983. Fire at the Ember Lodge claims 6 lives. Cause, electrical fault. Among the victims, clerk Alice May, 27. Beside it, a black and white photo. A calm, kind face with a soft smile. Her, the same woman from behind the front desk. He read the article again and again. Details didn't match across papers. Different dates. August 14th, 15th, even the 16th. Firefighters reported that the flames had erupted suddenly, consuming the roof within minutes. Witnesses claimed they saw silhouettes in the windows, long after the building was already ablaze. One of those firefighters, Tom Harper, still lived in the same town. Daniel found his address. The house was small, on the edge of town. An elderly man with trembling hands opened the door. When Daniel mentioned the name, the color drained from his face. The Ember Lodge, he repeated softly. You were there? Yes, Daniel said. I stayed the night, but it was all intact. And Alice May, she was alive. Or at least, she seemed to be. The old man smiled faintly, bitterly. She often is, for those who go back there. He led Daniel to the living room and pulled out a faded photo album. On the first page, a scorched rooftop, columns of smoke, the charred sign reading the Ember Lodge. I was young then, the man said. Saw the whole thing. We arrived within minutes, but the flames were already through the roof. Nobody made it out, and yet... He paused. I swear I saw someone in the windows, even as the fire reached them. You saw silhouettes? He nodded slowly. And I heard it too, the bell. The one above the door. It kept ringing, until the roof came down. His voice lowered, trembling slightly, as if he feared being overheard. The next day we went through the debris. Found a half-burned ledger, the guest registry. Most pages were gone, but a few names survived. He rose, fetched a box, and lifted out a charred notebook that still smelled faintly of smoke. Daniel opened it carefully. The handwriting, old-fashioned heavy ink. The top entry, Alice May, manager. And below it, his own name. Daniel Reed, Room 9. He froze. His fingers shook. That's impossible, he whispered. The firefighter nodded. That's what they all say. But if you stare into fire long enough, you start to understand. Some places don't burn away completely. They just get stuck between what was and what still is. Daniel drove off late that evening. On the way home, he listened to the voice memos he'd recorded during the trip. But there was something else on the tape. Soft, muffled, almost beneath the static. He put on his headphones, turned up the volume. Through his own words, a whisper surfaced. "Welcome back." He paused the recording and looked out the car window. Only darkness outside, flashes of headlights from passing cars. But in the reflection of the glass, he saw a woman's face. Her face. He blinked, and it vanished. The next day, he went to the local police department asking to see the official fire report. They let him review a few photocopies. The report read, "Probable cause of ignition, malfunctioning television in room 9. Below that, a note. At 0:07, heat sensors recorded a sudden temperature surge. 0.07. The exact time he'd been watching TV that night. The coincidence made his stomach twist. He scanned the list of victims. 5 names were listed. The 6th, blank. In the remarks section, only initials, DR. He set the folder down, walked to the window. Outside, the police lot was filled with old fire trucks, and beyond them, just visible, the outline of the hill where the Ember Lodge had once stood. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a light there, a faint glow, like a neon sign trying to flicker back to life. That night he dreamed again. The hallway. Endless, slow steps, black liquid dripping down the walls like smoke. At the end, door number 9, light leaking through the crack. He opened it. Inside, he saw himself, asleep in bed. When he woke, he wasn't sure if he'd ever truly left that dream. On his desk sat his voice recorder. He didn't remember turning it on. He pressed play. Footsteps, a door creaking open, the sound of the bell. And then, a woman's voice. "You came back." Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring into the darkness. He knew now. The story wasn't over. He would have to return. Because if the Ember Lodge really existed between worlds, someone there was still waiting to tell him why the fire never truly died. Daniel returned to the town once more. This time, he planned to go further, not just gather testimonies, but find physical proof that the Ember Lodge had truly existed. He managed to obtain permission to access the city archives, where old police records were stored, including evidence that had never been claimed by the victims' families. The storage room was in the basement of an old courthouse. The air smelled of dust, paper, and rust. A single lamp flickered as he descended the narrow staircase. The archivist, a thin man with glasses perched at the end of his nose, led him through a cramped corridor lined with metal shelves. "The fire case from the Ember Lodge is kept here," the man said, pointing to a gray cabinet. "No one's opened it in 30 years at least." He unlocked the cabinet. Inside lay yellowed photographs, melted metal fragments, scraps of burned fabric, and one box. Written across the top in black marker, "Registry book." The archivist shook his head. "Wouldn't touch it barehanded if I were you. It survived the fire. Mostly." Daniel pulled on the gloves and lifted the lid. Inside was a notebook. The cover was scorched, the pages brittle, but parts of the writing were still legible. He opened the first intact page. February 12th, 1974. Names, dates, signatures. Another page. Another decade. Then, August 1983. The last entry read, "Daniel Reed, room 9. A chill gripped his chest. His name, his handwriting. The exact same signature he'd made just a week ago. He flipped backward through the pages. 1978. The same name. Same curve of the D. Same slant of the R. 1965, 1953, 1948. Each time, Daniel Reed, room 9. His hands went cold. He sank into a chair, staring at the pages. How could this be? His name repeating every few decades as if someone had signed for him, or as if he himself had kept coming back over and over without remembering. He called out to the archivist who was standing by the door. Have you ever seen these entries before? No, the man said, adjusting his glasses. But I've heard the stories. They say that land once held an old railway station before the lodge was built. People vanished there, even back then. Daniel closed the notebook, but as he did, he felt warmth radiating from the cover. It was faint, like embers still glowing beneath ash. He placed it back in the box, but then noticed the lamp above him flicker. The light shifted from cold white to a deep red, and in the silence a sound, the soft, steady rustle of pages being turned. He spun around. The archivist was gone. Silence. Only that whisper of paper coming from the far end of the corridor. He took a cautious step forward. His footsteps echoed dully, hollow like inside a crypt. At the far wall, an old film projector sat on a cart. It was unplugged, but a flickering image glowed faintly on the wall. Black and white footage, a lodge, people arriving, the neon sign, and behind the counter, a young woman, Alice May. She looked straight into the camera. Her lips moved, no sound. He stepped closer, and through the hiss of static, a voice emerged, soft, distant. Don't come back. The image blinked out. The projector was still off, coated in a thin layer of dust. Daniel bolted from the archives, his pulse hammering. At the exit, a security guard stopped him. Everything okay, Mr. Reed? You look pale. Yes, just dust, Daniel muttered. He set the box down on the clerk's desk and quickly signed the release papers to borrow copies for his article. As he wrote, the ink on the form bled slightly, and he realized his hand was trembling. Then he noticed something else, another signature beneath his own. The same name, same handwriting, only older. Daniel snatched his belongings and left. Outside, dusk had settled. He reached into his pocket and felt the metal tag, room 9, the piece he'd taken from the ruins. The metal was warm, almost hot. He started the car. The radio turned on by itself, hissing static, then the faint sound of an old jazz trio, the same tune he'd heard that night. Then a man's voice, calm and smooth. You're listening to the evening program, August 15th, 1983. Daniel hit the power button. The music didn't stop. It only grew louder. Through the static, a whisper came. Room 9 is ready. He yanked the power cable free. Silence. When he looked up, his stomach dropped. On the passenger seat lay the guest book, the same one he had just left in the archives. He didn't remember picking it up. He opened it slowly, a new entry on the first page. Daniel Reed, 2025. And below it, written in thin red ink, check-in confirmed. His breath caught. Thunder rolled in the distance, a faint flash on the horizon, and he knew. The signs were calling him back. That evening, he sat at his desk and began typing his story. He titled it simply, The Lodge That Doesn't Exist. But as he finished the first paragraph, the faint scent of perfume filled the air. Floral, familiar. The computer screen flickered. Letter by letter, the title began to rewrite itself. Welcome back, Daniel. The monitor went dark, and in the silence that followed, a single chime rang out. The same bell. Daniel hesitated for a long time before getting behind the wheel again. He hadn't slept for 2 nights. His dreams tangled with waking thoughts, each bleeding into the other. But deep inside, he felt there was no choice left. If he didn't go back, the story would remain unfinished. And more than that, something was calling him. He left late at night. The road he had once driven in a torrential storm was now dry. The air was still, the sky cloudless. Only the pale moon drifted above the highway, cold and hollow. The car surged forward, its headlights cutting tunnels through the darkness. The GPS lost signal again. The phone screen read, "No service." Everything repeated itself, exactly as that first night. He switched on his recorder and spoke quietly. Recording, 11:41 p.m. I'm driving back to where the Ember Lodge once stood. I don't know what I'll find, but I need to see it with my own eyes. The wind had died. The night felt frozen in place, as if time itself had stopped breathing. Then, far ahead, a glimmer of light. Faint at first, distant, then brighter. A soft, flickering glow. Neon. He slowed down. His heartbeat quickened as familiar shapes began to emerge from the darkness. The Ember Lodge. Standing before him, whole, glowing, untouched. Above the entrance, the neon sign pulsed gently. Vacancy. The same colors, the same doors, the same layout of rooms. He turned off the engine and stepped out. The air was still, warm but tinged with the scent of smoke. No sound, only the ringing silence that follows memory. Daniel raised the recorder. 12:03 a.m., I'm here. The lodge looks intact. Maybe a hallucination, but I'm recording everything. He stepped to the door. The bell above it chimed softly, the same tone as before. And there she was again, behind the desk. Same uniform, same hair, same calm gaze. Good evening, she said, her voice gentle, unchanged, as if no time had passed at all. You've come back. Alice, he whispered. Your room is ready, she replied, smiling faintly. Room 9, as always. He looked down. The guest book was open on the counter, his name freshly written in dark ink. He didn't remember signing it. The key lay beside it. Heavy, brass, cold. He picked it up. His pulse echoed in his ears. The corridor greeted him with darkness. The lights flickered weakly, shadows moving across the faded wallpaper. He walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. The air thickened, hotter, filled with the acrid scent of burned paint and old smoke. Room 9. The number plate gleamed, brand new, polished, almost glowing. The key turned easily this time. Inside, everything was just as before. The bed, the nightstand, the mirror, the old TV. But now there was something new. On the nightstand lay a photograph, black and white, faded with age. Him, standing by the same window, in the same clothes. He turned it over. On the back, scrawled in faint handwriting, August 15th, 1983. He sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the mirror. His reflection looked calm, but in the corner of the room, a shadow moved, a woman's silhouette. She stood near the door, watching him. Why am I here? He asked. She stepped closer. You've always been here, she whispered. You just didn't remember. The TV flickered to life. On screen, flames, screams, the roof collapsing in fire, and through the crackle of static, a voice, his own, only older, raspier. If you're hearing this, and it means you've come back. Daniel stepped closer. On the screen he saw himself, standing in that same room, holding the recorder, as fire crawled up the walls behind him. He pressed the record button. 12:07, he said softly into the mic, voice trembling. I can see everything, but I can't feel the heat. Only the sound. And the sound grew louder. The bell, the footsteps, the quiet laughter of a woman. Alice stood beside him now, her face serene, almost sad. You never checked out, she whispered. None of us did. We're all still here. We're the ones who didn't make it out. The window filled with light, blinding yet cold. The air hummed like electricity. He looked into the mirror and saw them all behind him, the faces from the guest book, silent, watching. The TV sparked violently and went dark. The room plunged into shadow. One final chime echoed. Then, silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was sitting in his car. Morning light. The place where the lodge had stood was empty, only blackened earth and broken stone. On the passenger seat lay his recorder. He pressed play. His voice spoke calm but distant. 1207, room 9. I see them. They never left. They're still waiting. He stopped the playback and looked down. In his hand, the brass tag. A new engraving now shimmered faintly. Do not forget to check out. He looked up. Far on the horizon, a glint of light. And beneath the rising hum of the morning wind, a whisper, soft, familiar, inevitable. Welcome back. The night was calm, but the silence that followed everything was worse than the fire. Daniel sat in his car on the side of the highway, staring into the dark horizon. It felt as though nothing remained. No building, no flames, no light. And yet, in the still air, there lingered that same faint smell of smoke. The one that had followed him since the very first night. The recorder lay on the seat beside him. Small, ordinary, yet now the only proof that any of it had really happened. He pressed play. His voice came through broken, distorted, like it had traveled through time itself. Room 9. I see them. They never left. They're still here. Then another voice, a woman's, soft, quiet, familiar. You shouldn't have come back. Daniel stopped the recording. His hands were shaking. He glanced at the rearview mirror. And his heart stopped. She was there again. Alice. Her gaze was calm, almost sorrowful. She didn't move. Just watched. Why me? He whispered. Her lips curved into a faint, sad smile. Because you never left. And in that instant, she dissolved into smoke. The road was empty again. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to leave. Drive away. Forget. But when he looked down at the GPS, something strange appeared. The map showed not the highway, but an old unmarked road. Coordinates 41.09, 77.492. Next to it, a label, the Ember Lodge. The screen flickered. He tapped navigate. The voice calmly replied, Distance, 0 meters. You have reached your destination. Daniel leaned back in his seat. Maybe this was all in his mind. Stress, insomnia, a fracture between dream and waking. But in his pocket, he felt the metal tag. Warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He took it out. New words had appeared on the surface, etched as if from within the brass itself. Check-in, 1983, check-out. A dash. An empty space where the date should have been. He clenched the tag in his fist and closed his eyes. Then came the sound, clear, sharp, crystalline. A bell. When he opened his eyes again, the car was no longer on the highway. In front of him, the Ember Lodge, whole, glowing, its neon sign burning with warm orange light. The air thickened, heavy. The scent of smoke returned. Room 9's door stood open. He stepped out of the car. The world was still. Only the whisper of wind, soft, almost like voices. Step by step he walked closer. Light spilled from the windows. Behind the reception desk stood Alice, unmoving, watching. I came back, he said quietly. You can't help it, she replied. None of us can. He looked at the guest book on the counter. Names filled the pages, hundreds of them, and on every final line Daniel read. Different years, different ink, the same hand. Is this, a loop? He asked. Alice nodded. The lodge never vanished. It simply stayed between. Those who enter leave a trace and become part of us. He turned toward the mirror behind her and saw himself, older, the same eyes, the same brass key in his hand, and behind him, faces, dozens of them, silent, waiting. "What happens if I leave?" he whispered. "You already are," she said softly, "and every time you return." She held out the key, brass, with the red tag. "Your room is waiting." Daniel took a step back. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. A ringing filled his head. The walls began to ripple, melting like glass in heat. Light strobed and bent. The air thickened until it was hard to breathe. Then came the ash, rising from the floor, swirling, covering everything, and within it a fire. Not hot, not real, but alive. Room 9 appeared before him. Its door stood open, and beyond it, light like an eternal sunset. Figures waited there, still, peaceful, the former guests. They watched him silently, and among them, he saw himself. Daniel stepped forward. The light consumed everything. And then, nothing. Days later, the police found an abandoned car on the old highway. Keys still in the ignition, recorder on the seat. On the tape, silence, then faint crackling. And finally, a woman's voice. "The Ember Lodge welcomes you. Your room is 9. Daniel's last words, barely audible, followed. "I see the light. It doesn't fade." Then, a single bell chime. At the site where the car had stood, they later found a small brass tag. The engraving was worn but legible. Room 9, occupied. And when the wind dies down and night settles over the forgotten road, travelers sometimes glimpse a faint orange flicker on the horizon. A glowing neon sign, the Ember Lodge, vacancy. And in the dark, a whisper drifts through the air. "Welcome back."